Now, government has sent a warning to households employing domestic workers in South Africa. The Department of Employment and Labour says it will conduct daily inspections to clamp down on abuses in domestic work. And of course, now there's parity. The minimum wage for domestic workers is currently just above 23 Rand per hour. That equates to around 3,700 Rand for full-time work for a month. But a recent survey showed that domestic workers are still being severely underpaid, taking home on average 2,800 Rand per month. Let's speak to the Labour Minister now, Thulas Nxesi, joining us from Johannesburg. Minister, thank you for being with us. So these inspections, how will they work? Are you thinking of going sort of randomly to different homes, or will it be based on complaints or some sort of investigation?
Well, it's a combination of strategies that through our Labour Inspectorate in the department, we have prioritized this, the issue of the domestic workers. We've had a number of campaigns where we have decided to have the national seminars, provincial workshops, information sessions by our labour centres, and where we invite the unions and interact with them. But also in that, we're going for the radio interviews and the TV interviews in order to raise the awareness of both the employers and the employees. But of course, now we have decided, remember, you're talking about a very huge sector, the households where domestic workers are. And they are just isolated there. Some of them we are having to get the reports and then visit those particular areas. And some of them were able to get them working together with the two unions which are operating in that particular sector.
All right, so the warning would be don't exploit your domestic worker. That should be very simple, but we know that the exploitation is rife. I mean, how do you deal with workers who are underpaying or not following the legal prescripts, registering with the UIF, etc.?
Well, our approach is not necessarily a punitive approach. Our approach, we want to take corrective measures. We sit with the employers. We try and guide them. We show them their mistakes. We show them what are the basic things which they are supposed to do. And we give them time to do that, to register the workers, to register them in terms of the UIF and the compensation fund, and do all what is necessary. But we normally have follow-up visits, maybe after 6 months. If that has not been done after 6 months, then automatically we have to apply the punitive measures. But we have to be sensitive that the whole domestic sector, it's a very, very sensitive sector. We have to guide the people. But if we are pushed and people deliberately decide not to implement what they are supposed to implement, after we've had a number of visits to them, we have to apply the punitive measure. For instance, you remember of a particular case of one domestic worker who passed on because he got drowned in a swimming pool. We want to make sure that those workers are also covered in terms of the COIDA if they get injured in the work situations. And I think the employers need to understand that they can easily be sued if they have not covered their employees in terms of the compensation or the COIDA Act. So we are also trying to help and protect the employers themselves so that they are not claimed whenever there are injuries. So they must take it that it's not just about the workers, it is also about both the employers and the employees.
All right, you said you wanted to raise awareness. Can we make it very clear right now? Can you tell us what are the exact responsibilities of an employer? And when it comes to the minimum wage, now about 23 Rand per hour or 3,700 Rand per month, am I correct to say that, of course, excludes anything like free food or accommodation? That should not be deducted.
Yes. It depends on the employers. Some of them decide to include that. Some of them decide to exclude that. But we think that given these amounts, it would be ideal that the employers do not deduct such issues as food and so on. But some of them are insisting, but it depends on the negotiations, which must be conducted by the various unions. But what we want to emphasize is that the worker must be registered, the worker must be paid according to those hourly rates. Some of them do not need to pay 3,700 because they have to cut the time. They would decide that people come and do the cleaning or whatever within a particular minimum hours. Maybe they make them 5 or they make them 4 and so on. But some of them are full-time. They have to make sure that they pay the full amount. So it depends on the employer, from the employer to the employer. Some of them insist that they are taking cost when they are giving food, and remember, some of them are becoming what we call the stay-in, and some of them are not staying in, and they work for certain hours. So these will differ, but the minimum wage stands at 3,700 if the person works the maximum hours, which we're talking about the 8 hours.
Minister, I'm really interested to know, you said this is a sensitive sector, and we know that these often women are so vulnerable. For me, one of the saddest things is that often domestic workers don't earn more over time. They have no career progression like in other fields where people get experience and they can earn more over time. And we're talking about a small salary, especially if you've got to meet the poverty line, if you've got kids to feed as well. There were alarm bells ringing that maybe people would lose their jobs if we reached parity, and we've reached parity now where the minimum wage for domestic workers is basically the same as many other sectors. Do you think that is much of a deterrent? And let me briefly lay out the figures. About 1 million were employed before COVID-19. Still about a quarter of those women have not yet entered the workforce again.
Well, our approach is that we should not be reckless. We need a balanced approach. Remember, those employers, which are the households, are also faced with these stringent economic conditions. And a lot of other people in those, as the employers, have had their jobs cut. Some of them are working half-time. They are working, they are not working the full hours. And remember that COVID-19 has impacted on everybody. So that's why we're saying we need to adopt a balanced approach. But at the same time, we cannot undermine the standards. That's why we're saying the sector is very sensitive, because if you are not sensitive to that, you can end up with lots of people losing lots of jobs. That's why we are saying education is going to be very important. And in some instances, people decide to employ people part-time, and you find that the person works for 2 or 3 employers in a week in order to be able to increase the issue of the earnings. So that's how we see it. So it's a catch-22 situation. You are faced with the crisis economically, which impacts on the employers, at the same time which impacts on the employees themselves. Therefore, it needs a balancing act or a balanced approach when we deal with this particular matter.
Indeed, the cost of living going up, so affecting both sides of that equation. Minister, thank you very much for outlining that for us this late afternoon. Employment and Labour Minister Thulas Nxesi.